So today we're going to be looking at how you communicate and prepare for a carer's needs assessment. And bearing in mind the carer is autistic. And so looking at how you can do things just that little bit differently and things you need to look out for. And then on the 8th of December, we're going to be running a lunch and learn on understanding and recognising how sensory needs impact the autistic carer as well, and looking at that in a bit more detail. And then on the 8th of February, we're going to be looking at reasonable adjustments and what does that mean and how can you implement them. And reasonable adjustments are a thing that is a bit of a mysterious thing, as there is no such list as what a reasonable adjustment is. So we will be discussing that. As we go through today, if you can put your questions in a chat, we won't be having questions as we go through. Um, and I've just realised that I've got a little graphic that's covering the wheel on there. Shauna will be answering some questions as we go through, and she'll also be choosing some questions to leave till the end, some that are a bit more pertinent to the wider group that maybe needs a little bit more explanation. Please be aware we have, well, we're expecting nearly 200 people on this today, so there's no way that we will be able to answer every question. So I hope you will understand that, but we will try our utmost to answer as much as we possibly can do in the time that we have. So this is the outline for today. So we're going to start off by looking at how you carry out a carer's needs assessment for an autistic carer and how you can help plan and prepare that autistic carer prior to the assessment. What do you need to think about? What do you need to do? And then how can you communicate more effectively with the autistic carer? So we're going to start off just by looking at a bit of the legislation that supports all this. So the Care Act 2014 shows that carers can be eligible for support in their own right, and the threshold is based on the impact their caring role has on their well-being. So for an autistic carer, obviously the autistic carer themselves have needs, and so their well-being might need a little bit more thinking about than you would do when you are looking at a carer who is neurotypical. And then the Equality Act 2010 says that there is a duty to make reasonable adjustments if you're placed at a substantial disadvantage because of your disability compared with non-disabled people or people who don't share your disability. And substantial means more than minor or trivial. And we would take that substantial means that you're putting people on a level playing field, really. So this you can access things. And this is something that you're going to have to be thinking of as you are looking at doing a carer's needs assessment for somebody who is autistic. So carers with support needs, this is when you determine the care eligibility. This is what you have to be looking out for. So the carer's needs for support arise because they are providing necessary care to an adult. And for an autistic carer, their support needs, when you have an autistic child, there are a lot of support needs that the autistic carer has, but as that child grows up into an adult, often the impact is greater on the autistic carer. And as a result of their care responsibilities, the carer's physical or mental health is either deteriorating or is at risk of doing so, or the carer is unable to achieve any of the outcomes as specified in the regulations and as summarised in the section. And one thing that this brings to mind for me is for an autistic carer, autism, mental health is not part of autism, but a lot of autistic people do go on to develop a mental health issue. And if you have somebody who is caring for somebody with great need and they are getting more isolated, then you really do need to look at the impact on their mental health as you are doing the carer's needs assessment as well. And as a consequence of being unable to achieve these outcomes, there is likely to be a significant impact on the carer's well-being. And that can be through all sorts of areas. Are they eating well? Are they remembering to do things for themselves? How is the person that they're looking after impacting on them? So these are the main areas of difference for somebody who is autistic. And although you might be aware of them around if you're doing assessments for the child or the the person who is not the carer, it is also bearing that in mind for the carer themselves as well. So it could be with social interaction communication, they are finding it quite difficult to communicate to you how they are feeling, how things are different. For those who are very good at masking their autism, they also might be masking how much they are really struggling with the person that they're caring for. And they just might not be able to put that into words, or might not realise that they should be putting that into words to you. So you really do have to be more mindful of how you are asking questions of them. Sensory differences, how does that impact on them? And it could be that their sensory differences are very different to the person that they're caring for. And actually, sometimes they could impact on each other and could clash with each other. And then with restricted and repetitive interests and behaviour, if they have got quite a rigid way of thinking, it might be that they can't think outside the box of how to do things differently. It could be that they have got so used to doing things in a certain way, they are stuck in that pattern, and that is actually impacting as well on their health and welfare. So just be mindful of all the things that you know about for the person that you have done the needs assessment for. You also have to be mindful of them for the autistic carer as well. And also bearing in mind that you will have some autistic carers who are telling you that they're autistic, and some who may not have been diagnosed themselves, but actually that is what is impacting on them a great deal. Remembering that with the autism spectrum, everybody is different. And so, how one person is going to be interacting with you, not interacting with you, communicating, not communicating, it's going to be different for each person. Their needs are going to be different. And the autistic carer's needs are likely to be very different to that of their child. If their child is autistic, whether their child's little or an adult, their needs are likely to be very different to their child who you have already assessed. So you really do have to go with a blank canvas when you are doing the carer's needs assessment, and not take forward the similar things from the child, because even though somebody might be displaying things similarly, it might be impacted on them differently. And the carer might be very articulate when they are talking about their child and their child's needs. But when you start asking them about themselves and how they are feeling, they may have great difficulty in expressing what those needs are. So that is where you really do have to be a detective and do a little bit more digging into that. There was a carer I was talking to, well, actually, it was the brother of a carer I was talking to recently, and he had tried to fill in the referral form for his brother who is autistic. And he said when he went online to do it, because the area that he lived in, that was the only way to do the referral forward. He said that the questions weren't really that appropriate for when you're talking about somebody who is autistic. And so he found it really difficult to fill that form in. And so it's maybe something that is worth you going back to looking at to see the referral way through. Is it an appropriate way of doing it? Does it fit the need? And does it need changing? So the preparation for a carer's needs assessment, we're going to go through all this in step by step. So when do you usually carry out a carer's needs assessment? With some work that I've been doing recently, I have been told that quite often people are carrying out the carer's needs assessment at the same time or on the same day as they're carrying out the needs assessment for the person who is being looked after. Often it's probably best to do it on a different day so that the carer has time to think about themselves, that they're not still thinking about the person that they're looking after. Do you tell the carer that you are doing a carer's needs assessment? I have talked to people, autistic, non-autistic, who have had somebody into their house talking to them and asking them questions, and they haven't had a clue as to why this person is asking questions. Recently, I was talking to somebody who thought that they were having a financial assessment. When I was asking them what type of questions were being asked, it was obvious to me that it was a carer's needs assessment that had been carried out, and she was very oblivious to that. Do you prepare the carer in advance that you will be carrying out an assessment? because they need to have that advance warning, so that they can prepare themselves that the questions that are being asked are about themselves and not about the person that they are caring for. If you've not met the carer before, do you need to send them a photo of yourself, so that they know who's coming? If you've already been there and carried out the assessment on the child, then they obviously know you. But it may be that for the child, you already need to send a photo. If you're doing this, if you've got hair that's normally tied up and you decide that day to have it down, you're going to look very different. If you just had it cut, you're going to look different. For the guys, if you have a beard and you decide to shave it off, you're going to look very different to a picture with a beard. So make sure that the picture that you have sent is one that actually does look like you. And have you looked at what their preferable way of communicating is and having information sent to them? For some people, that could be by email. For some people, it could be that they need a letter. It could be texting. It could be verbal communication. So just checking out to see what is their preferable way of being communicated with. Why does it need to be different? Why do you need to do things differently for somebody who is autistic? This is something that we got back from an autistic person. When I get to see someone, I don't always understand what they're asking me. I don't give complete answers to their questions, and they do not press for additional information. So it is different for when you are working with somebody who is autistic, and so you need to be more specific in what you are doing. So here are some top tips you'll be able to add to this list as you go along. So plan to carry out the carer's assessment at different times to the cared for person's assessment. And this then gives them a differentiation of that you are talking about them and you are not talking about the person that they are looking after. And it gives them time to think about questions about themselves. Find out their preferred way to communicate it with. For some people, because of processing information, it might be that they prefer to have things written. It might be that by email, they can then process that information at a time that works for them, in a pace that works for them, and that they'll then be able to understand more of what is being sent to them. And then they know what is going to be happening more, and they are more prepared for the questions when you are meeting with them. Find out if they prefer to have a face-to-face meeting or a remote meeting. Um, One of the good things of coming out of COVID is there are a lot more people are now used to doing this sort of remote working. And for some autistic people, they prefer this. For others, they really do not. So just find out which works best. Does the carer know why you were carrying out an assessment? Tell them why. And it's also not to make somebody feel guilty that they have got needs. A lot of carers, especially parent carers, they are parents of their child. Why do they need anything different? Because they're looking after their child and they will feel guilty if somebody is suddenly saying, well, we think that you should have some help with this. Be mindful of that and be sensitive to that. But really do make sure that the carer knows why you are carrying out this needs assessment. Do you know of any triggers that need to be avoided when you're going to be meeting with the carer? If you know of people who have worked with the family before, then you may be able to find that out. Also, you could send out information beforehand, questions asking, is there anything that you need to know, things that they like talking about, things that they don't like, and that will give you some indicators of things to avoid. And also, if you know something that they like talking about, if when you're meeting with them, you are starting to stress them out because of the questions that you're asking, and you are bringing up emotive feelings within them. If they have got an intense interest in something that they like talking about, you could start talking about that, and that can help diffuse the situation. So all the preparation work is key, and the more preparation you do, hopefully then the better the meeting will be, and also the information that you're gaining from them will be better. So planning the needs assessment. Arrange to carry out the carer's needs assessment at a different time to the client's needs assessment. Don't do it as a follow-on. Maybe do it for a different day. Also, best to do it when they are the person that they're caring for is not there, so that you do have the attention of the carer. Explain what the carer's needs assessment is. Why does it need to be done? What is it about that is different to like financial assessment and anything else that they may have people going in to do with them? And give them a chance to ask questions of you of what the question, what the needs assessment is about, and that it's not that they are failing in what they are doing, it's just how they might need to be helped differently to somebody who doesn't care for anybody, and how the impact is of that person is on their life. Then questions to the carer before the meeting so that they can process the information, and it might be by processing that information they might then have questions for you because they're not understanding some of the questions that are there. And because of processing information, it's vital that you ask somebody one question at a time. So look at the questions that you've got and see if they need breaking down into simpler questions, into smaller questions, so that you are asking one thing at a time. And be prepared to break that down even more when you actually get to the meeting. Do they need an advocate with them at the meeting? And do they know that they can have an advocate, and explain what an advocate is and the reason for them being there? I know with some parent carers that I've met, it's actually been really good to have somebody outside the family, somebody who is trusted, there with them, because as you are caring for somebody who, especially a family member, as that person is growing up, it just becomes your normal life. To other people, it's an abnormal life, but if you are living it, it's your normality, and you do not realize how much extra you are doing and what that toll is on you, on your health and everything, because it's your normality. So sometimes having an advocate there who they know and they trust can help them maybe translate some questions to them from you, and also pick up on things that they've maybe not realized themselves. So it's just something to sort of talk about within the planning. So again, why does this need to be different for somebody who is autistic? The reason for moving things to separate times is that so that you are doing the carer's needs assessment on a different day to the needs assessment for the cared for person, is that it can be confusing if you are moving on to talking about their needs when their processing might still be on the cared for person. And so they might get jumbled up with who you were asking the question about. So just having it at a separate time just makes it very clear that this time you are talking about them, and it is very different to the meeting that you've had maybe a week earlier when you're talking about the cared for person. An autistic person may have difficulty processing a lot of information at one time, and also from a sensory perspective, from sensory input that they're having as well, that can also affect that their anxiety will start to raise. So if you're having it at a different time, they're going to be processing separate amount of information, but it's also that you might need to the information that you're giving them, you need to do it in a lot smaller chunks so that they are able to process. And also following up afterwards with written information means that they can process it afterwards to see what they have said and actually what else needs to be said with that. But really do make sure that you are giving them little information at a time. If there is an issue around the sensory side of things where maybe somebody is hypersensitive to smell and you've gone in with perfume or aftershave, you're going to impact on that meeting, and therefore they're going to have more difficulty in processing the information that is happening at that time. If it's a day when somebody's digging the street up outside and there's a drill hammer going and somebody is sensitive to sound, that is going to impact them as well. So sometimes it's also being prepared that you might have to change when that meeting is, and actually abort one meeting and set up a different day. And the carer will be focused on the information they need about the person they're caring for. So that is the reason why you have to have it on a different day, because their main thought process about needs assessment might be about the person that they are caring for. So these are some top tips with the planning. So plan the assessment for a time in the day which will be easier for the carer to give their attention to you. If they're caring for somebody who goes off to a day centre during the day, then time it for when the cared for person is out of the house. It's so that they can give their attention to you and they're not going to be sidetracked by other things that are going on within the house. Send out a written explanation before the assessment of what the assessment is and why you're doing it, and making sure that all that communication is clear and concise. And bear in mind that a lot of autistic people are literal thinkers, and so that explanation has to be checked that it is very literal, and there is no ambiguity within there. Explain who you are and what you are doing. Again, back to the thing that there are many professionals that visit people's houses, and so that make sure that they actually know who you are. Send out the questions beforehand so that the carer has time to process what you will be asking, and then that also gives them the time to think of questions that they might want to ask you as well. And remember to explain what an advocate is and ask if information also needs to be sent to the advocate as well, so that they know what is going to be coming. And then during the carer's needs assessment, how do you ask and phrase questions to the client? Bear in mind again the fact of asking one question at a time. And what we are really good at is asking a question and just putting a little add-on of a question at the end. And so then you're asking two questions. Because of how an autistic person will process information, if you ask too much at one time, then often they will forget the first bit and then start panicking, and their anxiety will go up because suddenly they can't remember anything that you've asked them. So really do think about what those questions are, and making sure that you are asking direct questions about what the information is that you want to know. Really be alert not to overload with information, and just being aware of them and how they are looking, and whether their body is showing any discomfort, and whether you actually might need to put a little bit of a break in so that they can just have a bit of time out from processing. Closed questions may elicit a yes or no answer. Can you cook your own lunch? Yes. Doesn't give you any information apart from the fact that they can cook their own lunch, whatever that lunch is. It doesn't say whether that is putting something into a microwave. Can they cook a lunch from scratch? Can they actually buy the food for the lunch? So just being careful about what the question is and how you put that over. And open-ended questions can be confusing. So things like, how are you coping? Doesn't really mean a lot. And things when you're talking about emotions, autistic people have difficulty in expressing how they're feeling about emotions, understanding how they're feeling about emotions, and being able to put that into words. Somebody that I know said, when people ask me, how are you? I have not got a clue what that person is asking me. They answer, I'm fine, thank you. But it's understanding what does the question mean in the first place. And this is a very intelligent person. And it's when you think about it, how are you? Does that actually, what does it mean? It doesn't mean a lot. So you really need to break the questions down into specifics. Processing information, back to the asking one question at a time. And then also telling them what to expect next. So when the meeting is finished, what's coming out of that meeting? Are they going to get a report? Are you going to send them a copy of what has been said that day? Please do, because then they can look over it and process what has been said, and then maybe get back to you with extra. When are they going to find out if they are eligible for something, and what are they going to be eligible for? What is the point of doing the carers needs assessment? What is going to come out of that? So really be explicit about that. And obviously, all this stuff goes to a board afterwards, and you won't know the answers to what they're going to get. But give them a timeline of when they're going to get that information. Some people who are autistic are really quite pertinent on timelines, and if pedantic on them, and want to know if you say they'll hear in 2 weeks, and 2 weeks comes and goes and they haven't heard, they're going to get really anxious about it and wanting to know why. So give them realistic timelines and contact details of somebody who they can contact to find out what is happening. So during the assessment, remember, some autistic people will take things literally. And so it's being careful of what you're saying. Have you ever seen a sign? do not walk on the grass. For a literal person, what can that mean? It means do not walk on the grass. They can go and somersault over it, cartwheel over it, hop over it, whatever else, and they are doing it right. They are not walking on the grass. The person looking after that grass will get really angry if they see somebody cartwheeling over it, and then an argument will ensue because the autistic person is not doing anything wrong because they are not walking on the grass. If the sign said something different, then you would get a different outcome. So just remember that people will take things literally, so you need to say what you mean. Sometimes you will get it wrong. Just explain it. We're never ever going to get it right all the time, and don't beat yourselves up if you get it wrong. Just learn from it and take that forward. So some of the top tips for juring. Have a written copy of the questions and give that to the autistic person. So this will help them with the processing and be able to keep them on track of what you were doing. Remember, I feel as if I've gone on about this quite a bit. Ask one question at a time and be clear and concise with what you're asking. Also, give time for answers. Remember, processing. For somebody who is autistic, this may take a little bit longer to process. So do give time for that. And in your planning of your time for meetings, bear this in mind that some meetings might take a little bit longer than some that you're used to going to. Repeat the answers back afterwards to check that you have understood correctly what has been said, so that they've got a chance to change it if it isn't what they meant. Avoid using irony, metaphors, humour, and idioms. I was training with a couple of people one day, and they said that when a client had walked into the room to put them at ease, the chap had just made a humorous comment that put the whole meeting off because the autistic person come in thought that this guy was having a go at him and was making fun of him, which wasn't the person's intent, but that was how it was received. So unless you know whether somebody does understand metaphors, whether somebody does like humour, really try and avoid it as much as you can until you understand the person and where they're coming from. There are a lot of autistic people who have great senses of humour and use humour a lot, but there are also a lot of autistic people who really do not get humour and then find it so difficult when somebody tries to use that with them. Remember literalism, and remember this: what you say is what you mean. Um, there was a teacher who had a little girl in her class, and during the morning session before the morning break, absolutely threw it down with rain. And the teacher just said, like, oh, crikey, it's raining cats and dogs out there. This little girl got so excited. When the break time come, she ran out into the playground and then came back in sobbing because she was expecting to see cats and dogs all over the playground, and they weren't. So really do try and remember about literalism and being specific with the questions that you're asking. You know where you are heading for with the questions that you're asking. So just try and be specific and creative in how you ask those questions so that you are making them clear and concise and specific for that person. And then afterwards, follow up with a written record of what has been said and what then is next in the process. Because for somebody who is autistic, what has been said in the meeting, their anxiety is likely to increase. And especially when you're asking questions about difficult situations that they're dealing with. And when you're doing a needs assessment, you're looking at all the dark side. You're not looking at any of the positive sides of things. So it is going to create a lot of emotion. And also for some autistic people, their how they feel about themselves can be quite low at times. They don't have a lot of self-worth, feeling that they're self-worth. So when you're talking about all the negative side of things, it can make them feel even worse. So their anxieties are going to go up. And by looking at the written record afterwards, when they're maybe in a calmer place, they will be able to see better what has been said, and also whether you have understood what they have said as well, whether there hasn't been any misunderstanding within that communication. And then, obviously what is next in the process. And that is really, really important, so they're not left just wondering what is going to be going on. Be prepared for additional information to be forthcoming once they've had time to process that. And also more questions might come out of it as well, just to clarify things in their own head. And it is possible that a second visit may be need to continue the assessment. They may not be able to deal with everything within one visit. So it's just being aware of that yourselves within your planning of what you were doing and where it's going. So top tips for afterwards is send a copy of what was recorded in the assessment so they can review what they've said, and also as to whether you have recorded it correctly. And that's not having a negative impact on you or them. It's just that sometimes that misunderstanding in communication happens a lot. Once they process what was asked, the carer may have further questions for you, and some may just be for clarification and to settle things in their mind. And it's often because within the day when you're doing this needs assessment, there's a lot of information that is coming out there, and it could be that they might get some things jumbled up of where things have been said. So please do have the patience to be able to answer these questions afterwards. And then asking them about difficulties they are dealing with could trigger the emotional reactions. So check if they're okay before you leave, and give them contact details in case they need to talk to someone afterwards, because you are going to be raising an awful lot of emotions within them, and you could be triggering off something of how they are feeling that is going to impact on the whole family after you've left. So it's just giving them, making sure that they are okay. And if they're not, they might be saying it to you. Just somewhere where they can contact somebody afterwards, so that they're not just left without anywhere to go. So we've come to the end of these, so we've got time to answer some of the questions. So Shauna, have you got questions that have come up that we can go through?
There haven't been any questions that I need to ask you. It's all questions that I've been able to answer in terms of whether the slides are going to be sent out afterwards or whether they'll have access to the recordings afterwards. So I guess we want to ask people to, well, invite people in to ask any questions that they might have about what we've talked about this today. Oh, thank you, Hazel. It was a fascinating presentation, you're right.
Has anybody got any questions that they would like to ask?
We have a question from Carol. Heather.
Okay.
Carol, are you unable to mute yourself?
I think one of the things with the webinar is that people can't verbally ask, so you need to put it into the chat, please.
It's okay, I've allowed my
while
mic.
that's happening.
I've unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for the presentation. One of the things that I was wondering was, I've been told that if you have a carer's assessment as a carer, you are required possibly to pay a contribution towards that financially. If that is the case, how do we explain that side of things to the autistic carer?
But they have to pay towards the needs assessment.
If they were found to be eligible and say they got a budget, that they would then have to pay a contribution, financial contribution towards the pleasure of receiving that budget. Has anybody heard that before? But also it's like that can become quite daunting for a person with autism, can't it? So the worry about the financial thing, and how do I make that decision? Is that a good move or not a good move? So, but it feels to me, that it's incorrect, but that's what my local authority has told me.
Okay, I'm just looking at all the reactions that are
Yeah.
So I think what you're talking about, Carol, is when someone has a needs assessments for them. So say the person is autistic and they have needs assessments that need to be met away from the carers. Every person is required to make a financial contribution, and that is deemed by the local authority. Sorry, that's my doorbell going off. How embarrassing!
No, that we know about, but I was really surprised to hear that if a carer had a needs assessment in their own right, if they were eligible for a budget and receiving a budget, then they too would have to pay a contribution. Now, I don't believe that can be right, but I just wondered if anybody else had heard that, because obviously if you're working with autistic carers, you would really need to be very clear about how you explained that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Carol. I think within our local area, certainly, and I can only kind of answer the question for our local area, carers don't actually have a financial assessment, but it might be different in the area that you're from. And I think it would be worth maybe exploring that with the head of social care to find out whether there's just been a misunderstanding within your area, and maybe sending out some comms, because if you're asking that question, I'm sure there's lots of people that have got the same question.
Right. Okay, well, I'll definitely check it out, but it's interesting to read all the responses in the chat, because obviously it would be better if we all had a consistent approach, but clearly that's not the case.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, though. Thank you.
So just before Carol asked that question, I think did a couple of others come through as well?
Bear with me, sorry, because there's so many people. My laptop is freezing, which is not a bad thing. I'm just going to run through and see if we've got any hands still up. My laptop says we don't have any hands still up.
I'm also thinking from what Carol's just said is that the financial assessment team also need to be in on this as well, don't they? As to where things are and how they express what they're saying to the autistic people as well.
Hazel has her hand up.
Are you able to unmute yourself?
Sorry, I've just allowed her mic.
Right.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I work in a local authority setting.
Sorry, you're very faint.
Very faint. Is that any better?
That's better. Yes.
Oh, thanks. Yes, I work in a local authority, and my knowledge is that obviously under the Care Act, carers have the same equal status for the first time in law as the person requiring support. That also then means that that local authorities could also charge them for any personal budgets that they receive. However, the general approach of most local authorities is that it's counterproductive to do that, because carers provide such invaluable support. Why would a local authority potentially deter people from coming forward and benefiting from that support? And that's why it's unusual but not unheard of for a local authority to charge unpaid carers. The best place for anybody to find that information for certain is every local authority will have a financial charging policy, and it would be specified in there if carers were to be charged. I just hope that might be of help to people, just in terms of a bit of clarification. And I hope I'm 99.9% certain in what I'm saying there.
Thank you. That is brilliant to be able to get that answer. Thank you.
That's really helpful, Hazel. Thank you. Heather, we have a question from Sue Barton. What types of questions would you recommend to be added to the application form, and do we have anything we can share?
Right, well, I'm going to put that back to Shauna. Have we got anything that we already have that we could share out?
So no, so we don't tend to really work within the carer setting at this point. This came off the back of a project that we did last year when we were exploring the inequalities that autistic carers were facing when trying to access health and support. So we literally are running these workshops and as part of the second year kind of program of this to really highlight the issues that the autistic carers were facing to enable things to happen more. But I think we will be sharing Heather's slides after this, which certainly help with thinking about the things that you want to know, and how you question those. So Sue's just said, just following on from the brother applying.
Yeah. So I think it would be good for us to sort of like look at what those questions are on. I did actually try to look locally to see what these questions were, but you actually had to sign into it to be able to get to see the questions. So that was impossible. So it would be good to look at the questions to see what they are and then see how they needed to be amended so that they worked. And I'm guessing each local authority has got a different set of questions. So it would be just need to be looked at and read through. For those of you who are not in our area across the country, you might have local autistic charities near to you that it's maybe worth you getting in touch with as well and getting their help to see if they can work with you on how you can word things a bit better. Okay, anything else?
I'm just checking through the questions. There's a lot of comments in there about the first question that we had, which is great. Oh, I've got another question. How much support is available from the DWP for applying for carers allowance for autistic adults? I'm going to be really honest with you. Again, that's not something that I'm aware of, certainly, Heather. I don't know if you've got that information. No. How much support is available from the DWP for applying for carers allowance? I mean, Julie, I can absolutely certainly go away and find out, try and find out an answer for you with that. It's not something I've ever been asked before, but I'd be happy to look into it and then come back to you.
It also could be worth getting in touch with in each area there is a carers charity. So like we've got carers in Bedfordshire, there is carers in Bucks, carers in Buckinghamshire. So there will be a carers organisation in your area, and they might have a lot more information on that you could access.
Lovely. Does anyone else have any other questions for Heather? So Heather, we've got a question from Philip. In your experience, what are the autism specific needs support for carers that are different to other carers?
So it's just being mindful about how autism affects somebody. So if you were going in to see an autistic person and how you would go in and have a meeting with them, you would do it a very different way to where you knew you were going in with somebody who's neurotypical, because of the what I said in one of the slides about the differences with autism. That is why there are different needs for autistic carers as well, because how they are seeing things and dealing with things are going to be very different. For some autistic people might not recognise straight away the emotional needs of somebody else. They might not recognise what they are for what they are. So they might not be recognising some of the stuff within the person that they're caring for and the impact that is then having on them as well. So it's because everybody who's autistic is different, it's very hard to say something quite specific about things, because it's just meeting somebody and knowing what their needs are. But they can be very different to somebody who's a neurotypical carer. The neurotypical carer is probably able to verbally tell you a lot easier how it's impacting on them, what the difficulties are, than it is for somebody who is autistic. So you really do need to be, as I said earlier, a bit of a detective of trying to uncover all that.
Lovely. Sorry, Heather. Philip's just he's just said apologies. I was meaning to support after the assessment. Sorry, support after and assessment.
So the support after, it's what is that support? I mean, I think for anybody who's having a carers needs assessment is like, well, what am I going to get afterwards? What is there? So for somebody who is autistic, it's again, it's what is their need? What do they need afterwards? And it depends on the person. And it could be for some that they might need someone to be able to go and talk to about what is going on, and to explain things about the benefits and everything like that. But it's maybe a new thing into their lives. So sorry, I'm not being very specific on this because it is quite a wide area of just knowing the person themselves and just looking at what that support is, where can they get it from, and maybe within your local areas of where you work, of having some information to hand of what is there out there that you can actually signpost somebody to, of where they can go and get care, some help. So we are Autism Bedfordshire. If somebody is in Bedfordshire, we have the helpline that people can ring up and contact and get some advice from. Is there something in your area that you can actually signpost people to? But it's also after the assessment, going back to the thing of how emotive that can be for the person, is that they might need a follow up from their social worker just to check out that they're okay, just to see that they are still on an even keel, that having gone through the carers needs assessment, it hasn't like upturned the apple cart, so to speak, that they're now feeling worse than they were beforehand, and just following that through.
Yeah, lovely. And Katie Thomas has said, would I be correct in assuming you would perhaps be conscientious as to where you're meeting a carer who is autistic if they have a textual sensory impairment as well as noise and other factors?
Very definitely. And that is where it's the preparation beforehand of knowing what those sensory needs are. There was one time I met up with a chap, and I knew we needed to be somewhere quite quiet, and local to where we lived there was a little coffee shop that was quite quiet. And what I had not entered my head is that they had a milk steaming machine that used to go psh whenever somebody wanted that sort of coffee. So we had to move and go and be somewhere else. So it has been very mindful of all those triggers, and having that information beforehand before you meet up with somebody. If any of you around the country aren't really that up on what sensory needs are, please try and find that out, because sensory impacts autistic people all the time, every time. If you have somebody who has got a sensory need, so looking at this textural thing, all they'll be able to think about is how that texture is to them, and not concentrating on anything that you're saying. They will not be able to really be in that meeting with you, because their thoughts will all be on the sensory stuff that's going on, and they're not able to filter that out to concentrate on you. So it's trying to make sure that you've got somebody in the best environment for them. That's why maybe at home, meeting them in their house, if the cared for person's not there, might be the most comfortable place for them. It's maybe where they'll feel more at ease.
Lovely. And then Kareem Parker has said a carer's assessment with a carer who is autistic is likely to take more time than a one-off visit. And that's absolutely true. If we look at a needs assessment for somebody who's autistic, the social worker should actually be going out to meet that person prior to the needs assessment taking place, so the autistic person can get used to that person that's coming out to carry out the assessment. So we should absolutely be applying that same theory to a carer who is autistic as well, just to make it more reasonable, so that the person feels comfortable and they've gotten away from that standard anxiety of meeting a brand new person for the first time, and it gives you the opportunity to also explain what's going to happen in the following appointment.
And I think what Sue says there about not wearing perfume, if I know that I meet somebody who's autistic, I never ever put perfume on, because I think you've got enough smells around your body of all the stuff you got get washed in, hair shampoo. Just try not to add on. It's also, if you might find out that somebody doesn't like a certain colour, and then you would try and avoid that as well. Not wearing stripes, just in case from a visual thing that the stripes are jumping around, or geometric designs. And I'm sure you wouldn't in going into like a professional meeting, but if somebody doesn't like eye contact, you wouldn't put on a t-shirt that's got a face on, because the eyes on that sort of face are huge, and can be then even more off-putting. So there's lots of things like that that are very easy to not do, and that you can avoid.
Absolutely. I think last year we had a young lady who was on our skills courses, and she told one of my tutors that she made her feel physically sick. And when we broke it down, we asked her what was making her feel physically sick. It was the floral pattern on the dress. She doesn't like floral patterns. They cause too much confusion and sensory overload, and that sensory overload leads to her wanting to vomit as the way of releasing it from her body. So we now know never to wear floral when we're supporting this person, because it's something that they just cannot handle, and it causes them undeniable pain and physical sickness. So lovely. Does anyone else have any questions? We've got a couple of minutes left, so please do feel free to ask any questions that you might have. But if not, we can bring the session to a close.